Hello and welcome once again to the channel. Today we're going to be dealing with two very interesting words. So the two words are Sabine or Shabin, and the other one is Bolong. Now they're very interesting words, so we're going to be using those two words to take a trip back into ancient times. So these two words, words that will take us back way back in time. So Sabine in St. Lucia, if you hear somebody say they're a Shabin, S-H-A-B-I-N, is usually a very light-skinned or fair-skinned person, something to do with the colorism, right? Or the color of somebody's skin. But when you dig deeper into that, you start digging into Roman and Italian history when you look at Sabines. So it says here that the Sabines are a group of people, Sabini or Sabinus, and these people basically were a group of people that helped establish Rome. They were very warlike people, and but the history before that is kind of opaque. But what we do know is that the second king of Rome was a Sabine. So they are very famous people, said to be very warlike, and they had certain traits like being frugal and paying attention to detail. But before I get into that, I want you to consider the idea of understanding things from a different perspective. So we're living in a time where you understand things through a Greco-Roman lens. So you understand things through the idea of the language of Latinized languages. But try to think of things differently. You know that word spell, right? Spell, to spell something, but also you can have a spell to cast a spell. So you can use words to kind of create a narrative or create an angle of what you want things to either mentally manifest subliminally or even physically manifest what you want to happen by using words. So back to the Sabines. So the Sabine language basically is said to have been a group of, spoken by a group of people which were instrumental in the founding of Rome. So it says, legend says that the Romans abducted Sabine women to populate the newly built Rome. The resultant war ended only by the women throwing themselves and their children between the armies of their fathers and their husbands. So the Sabine tribe, or the group of people, were very instrumental in the foundation of Rome, and then after that the whole Roman Empire and flows out of that. So they are foundational to the idea of Rome. So it even says here that the Sabines traditions, that the population of the early Roman kingdom was as a result of a union of Sabines and other people. So they're very instrumental. So lastly, it says that even though that the Sabines were kind of inaugurated or absorbed into the rest of the grouping after many wars and many years, but for example, the second king of Rome was a Sabine. But do your research on Sabines and the instrumental role they played in the whole Roman tradition, and then you know out of Rome flew out the Catholic Church and the conquest of the Roman Empire of many cultures. But the Sabines were quite instrumental initially in what Rome was, or what foundation of Rome, and then leading into what Rome became. But from that we will quickly look at another idea, Sheba. So we're using the idea of using words to try and understand things, not from the perspective or the popular narrative, but to use local knowledge and local culture and re-examine and re-understand things. So when I hear the word Sabine, I also think of Sheba, right? And this here now takes us back to even before the foundation of the Roman culture into Aksum and Ethiopia. Now, most of popular culture will tell you that Sheba is more from Yemen. But we must remember that Yemen at the time was like a client state of Aksum, okay, of Africa-Ethiopian tradition. It is right across the street from the Horn of Africa. So imagine Aksum, or the Ethiopian Empire, probably included all the countries on the border on the other side of Yemen, which would be Somalia, Somaliland, Eritrea, and spreading all the way inland into Ethiopia. So at that time, we know, very popular from the Queen of Sheba narrative in the Bible, where she traveled to visit King Solomon. The Kebra Negast is a book, an Ethiopian book, which details the idea of the queen visiting King Solomon and eventually heading back to her homeland or her country, but coming back with a son, which was King Solomon's son. So in other words, she had relationships with King Solomon and ended up having a descendant of King Solomon, which set up a root in Ethiopia. That might be disputed, but the Kebra Nagast clearly is a book written in Aramaic about that. So here we find information about the biblical idea of the Queen of Sheba and how the people were basically based in Aksum, and they were called Sabaeans, and they were in Ethiopia and Eritrea, right? And they were also spread in southern Arabia at the time, and that is before the foundation of the Islamic states, right? So predating that, you had the idea of Aksum and the Ethiopian linkage of crossing the strait and having a client state in Yemen. So there you have the queen. There has evidence of the queen visited King Solomon, and you also have evidence that the kings of Judah were trading with Aksum. So, and note an important thing that I think that should be noted here is that you have the word Negaste Saba, which meant the queen, Negast. Whenever you see that word Negus, Negast, you know it is of an African root, right? Because that is, you know, the derivative in modern days. We have Niger, Negus, and you know the word that they used to call black people, which is derogatory. But whenever you see words that like don't have a vowel in between, right, like MN and NG, you know it is clearly stating that that language derivative is out of an African origin. So basically, Makeda, you have that idea of a high official Sabaean being called Makeda, and Makeda is the high Sabaean, and which was the queen was known as. So we move from Sabine to the idea, Sabine from St. Lucia the word, to the idea of the Sabines out in Italy, and to the idea of Sheba or Saba out in Aksum and Ethiopia. So what I'm saying is these are just breadcrumbs. I'm peeling away at the layer of the onion so you can go and do a deeper dive into it. So in St. Lucia you would say en Sabine, a fair-skinned person, and you have this whole history of Sabines and Sheba, which now you can go and start digging and putting things together for yourself. Remember what I said about spells and words and how narratives are created, and sometimes we fail to look and understand things for ourselves. Now the last thing that I'm going to talk about is the word called bolong. Now this is very interesting. Now, bolum basically means, actually, when we were growing up, we would hear about a bolum, you know, hush speaking, campfire, telling eerie stories, but actually the bolum means golem. So I'm not going to talk too much about it because I made a promise, but it basically is a spoken word that creates life out of dust, and it is a Hebraic folklore or Hebraic tradition. But what is interesting, it finds itself in Creole St. Lucian culture as bolum, but it's actually golem. It's found in the Talmud, and it's very, very interesting, and it helps create these folk tales of Frankenstein, and the most famous of this would be the classic narrative by Rabbi Judah Low in Prague about the creating one of them to protect the Jewish people who were out in Prague and help them out, and that the creator controls that golem but may lose control of it. But it is very, very interesting. So those two words, Sabine and bolum, find themselves in the Creole culture, and yet we can see them go way back in ancient times or very olden days time, both into the Dark Ages and both into ancient historical times. If you like, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and I will bring you a lot more, because the language from Creole is very interesting and there's a lot to see. Thank you very much, and see you around for the next one.